Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Pierce, I'm curious, and this is a serious question. What do you think we should have done in this committee when the Secretary of Treasury comes in, the head of the SEC, FDIC, and explain where we're headed if nothing is done?
I agree with you that that was a terrible time, and it was a terrifying time. And having them come in and say we need to do something was a big weight towards pushing Congress to do something. But they did not have a clear plan on what to do, and things were bad even though there was a rescue put in place. Things would have been bad if there hadn't been a rescue put in place. But I argue that not having the government not step in at that time would have made for a shorter crisis and a healthier recovery.
So because we took action, we lengthened the recession.
Yes.
So now I'm really a little confused. So what did we do to the housing market? I mean, the housing market actually collapsed, and I think you and Mr. Mahoney both were saying that we misread the state of affairs, and we actually responded to a narrative that was incorrect. Did I understand you correctly? Okay, so there was nothing going on in the housing market.
I'm sorry if I was unclear on that. What I meant to say was that the problems in the housing market were driven by regulations, and not only housing policy that encouraged people to lend to people who couldn't afford the size houses they were buying, but it also—
Excuse me. Do that one more time. I don't want to misunderstand you.
So there are different elements of government policy that led to the housing crisis.
Okay.
One was that we encouraged loose underwriting standards, but a second important one, there were— I should actually have put the other one first, because the first thing is bank regulations that encouraged banks to hold certain types of securities, in this case, mortgage-backed securities, which drove a demand for mortgages, which then drove to the writing of a lot of subprime mortgages.
But the large banks were heavily invested. They were heavily invested into mortgages.
They were.
And so when the housing crisis hit, I mean, you do agree that we had a housing crisis?
I agree with that.
Okay. So so that impacted the balance sheets of the banks. Am I correct?
It did, right.
And so you're saying that with that going on, the responsibility for this committee was to do nothing?
If you're asking me whether TARP was a good idea, I don't think that TARP was a good idea. It was a bailout that perpetuated this notion that the government would step in when there's a problem.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It perpetuated the idea that people who make bad decisions are not responsible for the consequences. And I'm talking about the banks who made bad decisions. They should have been responsible for the consequences of their decisions.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you on that. But I'm not sure that I understood the answer. Either you or Mr. Mahoney. Where I'm getting at is, so the response we had was to walk into the committee room where we met and say, we're in the midst of the greatest financial crisis since the Great Depression, and let us together hold hands and do nothing.
Restraint is sometimes the best indicator of wisdom.
So you're saying that's what we should have done?
I'm not saying that the crisis wouldn't have been bad, but the crisis was bad even with the emergency programs that were put in place. There are certain things that could have been done to help homeowners, for example, to soften the blow, but to take this big action of putting money into banks was not a wise response. And I understand what drove it, but I would argue that it perpetuated the problems that we have.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back.